When we read the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, we encounter numerous accounts of men having multiple wives. This raises a significant question. Why did God allow multiple wives in the Bible? Don't miss out on this unique discovery. We researched this narrative heavily to find out the biblical truth reflecting on the presence of polygamy in the Bible. All devout Christians have heard this fact, but few know the full story. Let our experience lead the way, as our channel founder has worked with his Christian church for over a decade, and our vantage point is unique in this never-before-seen analysis. To understand this concept fully, we need to delve into the cultural, historical, and theological contexts of the time and explore how God's relationship with humanity and his plan for salvation unfolds through these narratives. Let's begin. What is polygamy, after all? Polygamy is the practice of having more than one spouse at the same time. It is a form of marriage in which a person, typically a man, has multiple wives, known as polygyny, or, less commonly, a woman has multiple husbands, known as polyandry. Polygamy has been practiced in various cultures and religions throughout history, often for social, economic, or cultural reasons. In the context of the Bible, polygamy refers to the practice seen among some of the patriarchs and kings, where men had multiple wives. This practice is depicted in the lives of figures such as Abraham, Jacob, David, and Solomon. While polygamy was accepted in certain periods and cultures within the biblical narrative, it was regulated by specific laws to protect the rights and dignity of the wives involved. Understanding polygamy in the Bible helps provide insight into the historical and cultural contexts of biblical times, as well as the evolving understanding of marriage within the biblical tradition. That's all great information, but when was polygamy actually practiced? Polygamy was allowed and practiced in various periods throughout the history of the Israelites as recorded in the Bible. Here are some specific periods and contexts when polygamy was prevalent. Around 2000 BC, Abraham had his primary wife, Sarah, and took Hagar, Sarah's maidservant, as a secondary wife, Genesis 16. This arrangement led to the birth of Ishmael. Also in approximately 1800 BC, Jacob had two primary wives, Leah and Rachel, and also took their maidservants Bilhah and Zilpah as secondary wives, Genesis 29:30. These relationships resulted in the 12 tribes of Israel. Furthermore, though not explicitly mentioned as a polygamist, Moses did have at least two wives, Zipporah, a Midianite, and a Cushite woman, Numbers 12:1. Also, during the period of the Judges, circa 1200-1050 BC, Gideon had many wives and concubines, resulting in numerous children, Judges 8:30-31. Again, around 1000 BC, David had multiple wives, including Michal, Abigail, and Bathsheba, 1 Samuel 18, 1 Samuel 25, 2 Samuel 11. His polygamy was part of his life both before and during his reign as king. In the early part of his reign, around 970-930 BC, Solomon famously had 700 wives and 300 concubines, 1 Kings 11:3. His extensive polygamy was partly political, forming alliances with other nations. However, by the time of the post-exilic period, after 538 BC, the practice of polygamy was declining. Ezra and Nehemiah addressed issues of mixed marriages and improper divorces, but did not focus significantly on polygamy. Ezra 9:10, Nehemiah 13. By the time of the New Testament, 1st century AD, monogamy had become the normative marital practice for the Jewish people. Jesus affirmed the creation ideal of one man and one woman in marriage, Matthew 19:4-6, and the apostles, including Paul, reinforced monogamy, particularly for church leaders, 1 Timothy 3:2, Titus 1:6. Polygamy seemed to be pretty prevalent in ancient society, but where was it practiced most often? In what areas and countries? Polygamy was practiced in various regions and cultures throughout the ancient Near East, including among the Israelites as recorded in the Bible. Here are some specific contexts and regions where polygamy was practiced. Polygamy was common in Mesopotamian societies, such as the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians. Kings and wealthy individuals often had multiple wives and concubines, which was reflected in legal texts like the Code of Hammurabi. Also, in ancient Egypt, pharaohs and high-ranking officials often had multiple wives and concubines. Polygamy was a way to ensure alliances and secure the succession of heirs. Continuing on, the Canaanite societies, which existed in the region that is now modern-day Israel, Lebanon, and parts of Syria and Jordan, also practiced polygamy. This cultural practice influenced the Israelites, who interacted closely with the Canaanites. Neighboring tribes and nations such as the Moabites and Ammonites also practiced polygamy. These cultural practices sometimes influenced the Israelites, as seen in marriages between Israelites and Moabite or Ammonite women. The Phoenicians, who lived along the coast of modern-day Lebanon, practiced polygamy. Their trade and cultural interactions with the Israelites likely had an impact on Israelite practices. I can't believe it was that prevalent, but are there actual biblical references to polygamy? Here are a couple of direct biblical examples. Abraham took Hagar, an Egyptian maidservant, as a secondary wife while he and Sarah were in Egypt, Genesis 16. The patriarchal family origins trace back to Ur of the Chaldeans in Mesopotamia, where cultural norms included polygamy, Genesis 11:31. Now that we know where and when polygamy was practiced, why on earth would it have been practiced at all in societies? Well, here are a few reasons. In ancient times, high mortality rates due to disease, war, and harsh living conditions necessitated practices that ensured population growth and survival. Polygamy allowed a man to father more children, thereby increasing the chances of family survival and continuity. Women in biblical times often relied on male relatives for economic support. Polygamy enabled men to provide for multiple women, ensuring their security and livelihood. In a society where male heirs were crucial for maintaining property and wealth within a family, having multiple wives increased the likelihood of producing male offspring. Marriages in ancient cultures were often strategic, used to forge alliances between families, tribes, and even nations. Polygamy strengthened these alliances by uniting multiple families, creating broader social and political networks. For example, King Solomon's many marriages were partly political, aimed at solidifying alliances with neighboring nations. Ancient societies were predominantly patriarchal, with men holding primary authority and power. Polygamy reflected and reinforced this societal structure. Wealthy and powerful men, such as kings and tribal leaders, could afford to have multiple wives, showcasing their status and resources. In a context where women were vulnerable and often dependent on male relatives, polygamy provided a means of protection and care. A man with multiple wives could offer security and provision for more women, reducing the likelihood of women being left destitute or unmarried. The Law of Moses provided specific regulations to manage polygamy and mitigate potential abuses. These laws aimed to protect the rights and dignity of wives and children. For instance, Deuteronomy 21:15-17 required that a man with multiple wives must treat the children of the less loved wife fairly in inheritance matters. Exodus 21:10-11 stipulated that a man must not deprive his first wife of food, clothing, or marital rights if he takes another wife. Deuteronomy 17:17 warned that kings should not multiply wives excessively to prevent their hearts from turning away from God. Additionally, polygamy in the Bible can also be seen as a reflection of God's permissive will. While God's ideal for marriage, as presented in Genesis 2:24, is monogamy, one man and one woman becoming one flesh, he allowed polygamy within certain historical and cultural contexts. This permissiveness addressed specific social and economic issues of the time, but was regulated to prevent harm and injustice. But all this being said, how could an all-loving God possibly allow polygamy? How is it fair to women? The question of how God could allow polygamy, despite its apparent conflicts with the ideals of monogamy, is a complex and nuanced issue that requires an understanding of the broader biblical narrative and God's relationship with humanity. Here are several perspectives and explanations that may help shed light on this topic. In ancient times, polygamy was a common and culturally accepted practice in many societies, including those surrounding the Israelites. God's permissive will allows for certain practices to exist within specific cultural and historical contexts, even if they are not His ideal. By permitting polygamy, God addressed the practical realities of life in those times. For example, having multiple wives could ensure the survival of a family line or provide economic stability for women who otherwise might remain unmarried and unprotected. Although God technically allowed polygamy, He also set forth regulations to mitigate its potential abuses and protect the rights and dignity of those involved. The concept of progressive revelation suggests that God's ultimate intentions for humanity are revealed gradually over time. While polygamy was permitted in earlier periods, the Bible points towards monogamy as the ideal marital relationship. This is evident in the creation narrative, where God establishes the pattern of one man and one woman in marriage, Genesis 2:24. Jesus reaffirms this ideal in His teachings. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh, Genesis 2:24. Have you not read that He who made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, "For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh," Matthew 19:4-6. The New Testament also reflects this shift towards monogamy as the normative standard for Christian marriages, particularly in the qualifications for church leaders, 1 Timothy 3:2, Titus 1:6. Also, the Bible does not shy away from depicting the negative consequences of polygamy. Many biblical narratives illustrate the familial strife, jealousy, and conflict that arise from polygamous relationships. These stories serve as cautionary tales, highlighting the challenges and dysfunctions that often accompany polygamy. For instance, Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar's polygamous arrangement led to significant family conflict and strife, Genesis 16:21. Jacob, Leah, and Rachel's jealousy and competition between Leah and Rachel caused tension within the family, Genesis 29:30. King David's multiple marriages contributed to familial discord, including the rebellion of his son Absalom, 2 Samuel 13:15, and Solomon's many wives led him to idolatry and strayed from God, 1 Kings 11:1-8. Also, God's allowance of polygamy also underscores the role of human free will. God created humans with the ability to make choices, and He permits them to exercise their free will, even when it leads to less than ideal practices. Through this process, God teaches and guides His people, using their experiences to reveal His greater truths and ideals. The allowance of multiple wives in the Bible can be understood as a reflection of the cultural and societal contexts of the time, combined with God's patience and forbearance towards human weaknesses. While God permitted polygamy, the negative consequences evident in the lives of polygamous individuals reveal that it was not His ideal for marriage. God's original design, as seen in Genesis and reaffirmed by Jesus, points to monogamy as the true reflection of His will for marital relationships. As we study these biblical narratives, we gain a deeper understanding of God's redemptive work through history. We see a God who meets humanity where they are, but continually calls them towards a higher standard. The progression from polygamy to monogamy in the Bible underscores the unfolding of God's plan for human relationships, ultimately reflecting the divine love and unity He desires with His people. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel for more insightful content on Christianity and the Bible. Comment Amen if this article has deepened your understanding of God's plan for marriage between one man and one woman. Bible Short Stories, signing off.